Welcome to the Bad Boss Brief. I'm Stephanie Peirolo.
And I'm Eugene S. Robinson.
And we are at episode 45. And we are calling this, What Do You Do When Your Boss Thinks You Want His Job?
Well, I guess you should start out by not telling your boss you want his job, which I have done. When they get that question in the interview, where do you see yourself in 5 years? I kind of jokingly said, doing what you're doing. Didn't get that job.
Yeah, possibly a strategic error. So this one actually comes in from a question that was sent in by a listener, which I thought was going to be a sub rosa, but there's enough here that I really want to unpack it. It was an interesting story. You too can contribute, WTF at badbossbrief.com. And this guy, I'm not going to use his real name. I'm just going to call him Jack. He was indeed surprised that I wrote him back more than once to give him some advice. But I thought there were a couple of interesting ideas here. So let me set the stage for you. Okay. Jack works at a very, very high-end resort in a beautiful part of the world. I have looked at images online of this place, and it is gorgeous. He works with celebrities, he works with, billionaires, and his job is to run the boat that takes them from one place to another across water. He's got lots of experience. He's in his 40s. His boss and most of the other people that work around the resort are young, right? They're younger people. They might not have as much experience, but he doesn't care. He just wants to kick back in a beautiful place, do his work and then go, play with the celebrities and the billionaires on the golf course. So he wrote, and his first question was, how do I convince my boss that I don't want his job? But then when I did a little bit of digging and he got the rest of the story, the reason that this came up was because one of the people on the crew on the boat, and again, I don't know how big this boat is, I live in Washington State. So when I think of a ferry, I think of a behemoth that can, carry 100 cars and, people and whatever. But one of the people on the boat, who I think was like 19 or 20, the boss scheduled him to work overtime, which is not allowed. You're only you can't work more than 12 hours a day. The kid was in like his 15th hour and he got hurt.
Oh.
And then Jack said to someone involved, well, where's the paperwork? You have to file paperwork when these things happen. The boss didn't want to file the paperwork.
Oh.
So Jack went to his boss's boss and said, hey, there's a couple of problems here, right? Working overtime, that's not allowed. Young, relatively inexperienced person. Injury, no paperwork filed. No addressing the multiple, process problems here. The boss's boss went to the boss, who turned around and got angry with Jack.
Yep. Which Jack should have seen coming, but okay.
Well, yes and no. Yes and no. Again, using the Washington State ferry example, I've known people who worked in the ferry system, and it is extremely well regulated. And you have to jump through a lot of hoops to be able to steer one of those things, right? And so there is a priority and there is process for safety. And this is one of those, I actually think that's pretty egregious bad boss behavior.
The boss, Jack's boss, that is bad behavior, but Jack is a marked man now, right? So kind of what he's asking is, how do I convince the guy who I just knifed in the back for good reason that I didn't really knife him in the back and have no interest in knifing him in the back again? And since you can't go back and undo what was done, what I would have done, suggested is to push really hard to get him to understand that if you do not do this, the repercussions are serious. If word gets out, not from me, but from anybody, word could get out. The boss's boss, that was bad form to go back and tell the boss where he got the information from. That was bad form. But and I believe he did it on purpose to discourage that kind of whistleblowing. But it's your job. It's more importantly, these are people connected to you. You don't want them hurt. And so he did totally the right thing, but now he's got a target on his back. So now I guess, how do we assuage the boss who probably morally would probably end up doing this again, right? So how do you create a situation where it doesn't happen again and you don't get punished because it happened once, right?
Well,
Is
and
that
I think, I mean, I would, what I suggested, right? What I think could be
Mhm.
useful. I think there's a couple ways to approach it, right? One is to name it to the boss, right? In much the way that you said, and maybe reframe the narrative. So the
Mhm.
narrative is not you were not good at your job and I went over your head to complain about it, right?
Mhm.
But to reframe it as I, Jack, whose job it is to run this, ferry,
Mhm.
had some concerns about safety, had some concerns about, the hours that this kid was working, had some
Right.
concerns about paperwork, the damage, possible litigation. There's all sorts of things.
Yeah.
What would you suggest that I do? I
Yeah.
don't
That's a
want
good
your
one.
job. I want to be respectful. Um, if there's ever a concern, what should I do?
Yeah.
Right? Because it sounds like what everybody in this organization, except for Jack, wants is just don't say anything.
Yeah. That's not going to work.
Right. And so to go
And it's,
back
yeah.
and address it directly, what
Yeah.
would you have had me do?
Yeah.
It might be a step, but I don't know. Maybe he has the target on his back and it doesn't matter.
It's coming up in my mind a memory of the situation in Rwanda. And I remember reading some account by a UN aid worker or some such person, somebody who was there, as one of the generals stood over an open pit with a machine gun and was about to murder 100 people. And he said, "Do not do this." And the guy was like, was in the froth of the moment, not listening. And he said, and the guy, kind of along the lines of what you just suggested, he goes, "Let's look into the future. After this conflict is done, and the UN is tallying up the bodies, and you are on trial for war crimes. Let's look at that moment." And the guy finally it broke the spell, and the guy, according to the UN worker, paused, put the gun down, said, "Okay, arrest him, put him in jail." So to have this kind of, I just want to. It seems unsafe to me. It seems you're going to get in trouble, and I'm concerned about you. Yeah, that seems to be probably a better way to cast it. Unless unless the guy has already made up his mind that you're a snitch, and then you're not going to get any peace. You got a target on your back. I would suggest looking for other work. I
Well,
don't,
but I just also want to name that person in that story who said to
yeah,
the guy with a gun in his hand,
yeah,
let's rethink this.
yeah,
Let's just name the bravery there. Because
yeah,
that guy could
yeah.
just as easily have turned the gun in his direction and one
Yeah,
bullet and
yeah,
he's quiet.
yeah, yeah. Well, I think this guy, the aid worker, had in this instance, the benefit of being a white observer. So, yeah, that would have taken some doing. But I mean, these are serious things. And there's a guy who I had on my podcast who was a forklift driver, had not been properly trained in a forklift, was out jinking around the forklift. It fell over. He is now paralyzed from the waist down for the rest of his life, and that's it. That's it.
Right.
He's got a wife, 2 kids. Yeah, he got a big settlement, but that special van he could drive around in. He said, but he liked walking, and that's never going to happen ever again. So
So
safety on these big rigs, on these big things, it's not even a joke. The guy completely did the right thing. If it cost him his job, oh well.
So I think there's two aspects here. One is the whistleblower aspect of it.
Yeah,
And essentially
right,
what Jack was saying is he asked me, he asked us, am I the asshole here?
right, right,
Right. And I think
right.
it was a genuine question because clearly he's getting a lot of he's getting some pushback from the people that he works with. So Jack, no, you were not the asshole. You were
Mm,
absolutely in the right based on, what it is that you described to us. I think that's one issue, and that like anybody else in a whistleblower scenario,
mm.
you have to make your peace with your future self. Right? There were
Yeah,
plenty
yeah,
of people who knew what the Sacklers were doing when they were
yeah,
marketing OxyContin as
yeah,
a painkiller that wouldn't cause people to get addicted.
yep,
Right? There were
yep,
consultants, there were people who worked at other companies, there were marketers, there were scientists. There were a lot of people who made a choice in
Mhm.
the moment to not say anything. Right?
Mhm.
And there may have been valid reasons for those choices, but looking back now,
Mhm.
how do you look at yourself in the mirror knowing that
Yeah.
you participate? How do you look at yourself in the mirror if you're one of the Sacklers who profited from that
Yeah.
and continues to profit from that? So I think there's the moment where people have to make a decision about their own moral compass
Yeah.
and what it is that they feel like is right for them and the future. But I think the other thing, which is a question that's going to happen to a lot more of our listeners, is
Mm.
what do you do if your boss, like if you are better than your boss at something?
Mm.
Right. And I think it's worth spending a little time there because I think there's two aspects to that. Right. So good leaders, in my opinion, hire people who are better than they are
Yeah.
across the board,
Yeah.
especially in certain is with certain skill sets that they, the leader, don't have.
Mhm.
Right. So
Mhm.
this might be a creative leader who hires somebody who's fantastic as a CFO and makes
Mhm.
sure that because she's not really good at detail, she has somebody who really can manage the detail. Right.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
that is good leadership. You're smiling. Why are you
Mhm.
smiling? Do you have a story for that?
Yeah, I am. I was thinking about having written a piece, and it was when they first started having these open offices, and I had been pulled in as a hired gun. They gave me some title of senior editor to help out the editor in chief. And the editor in chief out loud in the bullpen says, I just read your cover story, Eugene. You know, we don't really make up words here. I go, what word do you think I'm making up? She goes, hustings. And rather than hold my tongue at that point, I go, what community college dictionary are you using? You know, I'm my own worst enemy. And she's like, "Huh, well, which one did you use? I go, dictionary.com, any book, any dictionary. And so she types it in, and there's that, the whole office is now, it's like a moment, it's like a schoolyard moment. As she types it in, she looks it up, she finds the word, and now she's got to save face. And she finally says, well, we don't use we most people wouldn't know what that word is, so you have to change it. And I, rather than just nod at that point and say, okay, I go, okay, what I shouldn't have done. So, she should have appreciated the fact that, like, yeah, I'm probably better at this than you are, right? I mean, you guys brought me in as a special hired gun to do your cover stories. I might know what I'm doing, but you're going to put me on blast like that. I should have been a bigger person and not have retaliated, but it gets to be tough sometimes.
Well,
I mean, yeah,
and I certainly am guilty of those same things, right? Like I
yeah, yeah,
was often in a business development role, and I would have a better understanding of how to negotiate or how to sell than
right.
the boss did. And instead of stepping out of my way and letting me do my job, he,
Mm,
because it was inevitably a he, would decide to, question my judgment or step in over me or do something. And it was never
yeah,
helpful.
yep.
However, if, in those circumstances, do what we say, don't do what we did, right? Because that's
Right,
not
correct,
going to endear
correct.
you to anybody. Like I used to have this phrase where I would say, "You want me to do that? You want me to handle it that way? Really? You're sure?" And then I would pause and say, "Okay, you're the
Ah!
boss."
Yeah, 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 yeah. It's
Not
tough being an
helpful.
alpha. It's tough being an alpha, it's difficult. Yeah.
Well, and I also think we need to acknowledge that there are going to be was the woman who questioned you on hustings a white woman?
Yeah, Leslie. Yeah, she was.
Okay. So I do think that there are going to be some assumptions, right? I have seen
Oh, but
people
but
what
as she told me the first week on at the job, her sister was married to a black guy.
well, and again, I have
Yeah, yeah,
certainly
that's great. That's great. Thank you. I mean, what? Ridiculous.
I have seen people question your expertise in a way that felt very connected to your skin color in actual
Yeah.
jobs that we have actually worked at together. So, I mean, I have to assume that that played for you. My gender probably played for me. Sales, particularly like the negotiation, big sales deals, is more of a men's sport than a
Yeah,
women's
yeah.
sport.
Well, yeah.
So that's going to be part of it.
I would make the claim that in this regard we had failed, and that maybe could frame our advice here because the first sales job that we had would have been to sell it to the boss, right?
Right.
I mean, and the ego is a kind of a terrible thing. I mean, I should have done a better job of selling it to her. I just couldn't, I felt attacked. And so,
Right.
I reacted and I should have been a bigger person, take a deep breath, kind of walk over or send her just a link with hustings on it instead of, but I didn't like that. But yeah, I was under pressure. She put me on blast. I did 4 cover stories for you guys, and now you're impugning my editorial skill. So I was easily provoked. But this guy, I'd say, I mean, what I know about nautical stuff, that's kind of that's kind of a it's not always an easy job. So the first job would have been to sell it to the boss, say just like the guy in Rwanda did. Listen, we are going to get fried if anything happens to this kid. We have a lot of exposure. We are going to get fucked if the unnamed boss who put him on Front Street in the first place hears about this. We should get ahead of this. And if the guy ignores your promptings at that point, he's an idiot. He's not going to last long. And do what you got to do.
Well, and this also brings us to another point, which is what if you are a boss who has been skillful enough to hire someone who is better than you are in a certain
Right.
area? And I think
Right.
there's a couple of things that you can do. And maybe we are the illustration there as well. A lot of times people who have a very specific skill,
Mhm.
and I'm thinking particularly of somebody who's like, an incredibly strong developer or just like a genius at strategy, or they're an expert in AI, or, something that's very high demand and actually a very challenging skill to have real competence in. I think you
Mhm.
should treat them very carefully. And
Mhm.
maybe even though I'm not a big sports person, maybe think about it as like this is the sports star, right? This
Right.
is the Heisman Trophy winner. This is the person who is going to, win you the Super Bowl.
Yep.
Be careful about how you treat them and recognize that it's not. I say this a lot to my executive coaching clients. Don't make assumptions about what motivates your
Mhm.
star,
Mhm.
employees or just any
Mhm.
employee. Ask
Mhm.
them specifically and pay attention. Right.
Right.
So, like, I have had bosses who understood that, at a certain point in my career, I could have sold sand in the desert for a
Mhm.
premium price. And
Mhm.
they just got out of my way.
Yep.
They were just
Yep.
like, what do you need?
Yep.
Go forth and
Yep.
make money for us.
Yep.
Right. And
Yep.
it was a delightful experience. And they focused me where I could have the most impact. And they
Mm.
didn't ask me to do stupid things like, spend 2 hours a day doing sales reports or,
Yeah.
and so there was some flexibility and understanding. And I think, right now the job market, depending on who you talk to, can be challenging for certain
Mhm.
segments of
Mhm.
people.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
recognize that the ones with the kind of rock star potential
Mhm.
do have other options. And
Mhm.
they also might not be motivated as much by security, right? Like I think both
Yeah.
you and I, if you look at our careers,
Yeah.
we are pretty, we have a certain amount of risk tolerance.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
And I would
So.
imagine that people who are those kinds of superstars also have a certain amount of ego, some risk tolerance, a
Mhm.
desire
Mhm.
for other things besides just money. What do you think?
Yeah. So hold on. So okay. So he know. So the boss now has said you're out for my job. This guy Jack might feel like he's got a target on his back. Presuming this is something that he really loves and wants to do. And at what point would you ever or do you ever suggest making the boss's fantasy a reality? Like you got a target on your back. You're taking the shots. At what point do you, or is it advisable at all to say, you know what? I should take it if I can take it, right? If this guy is going to continue doing company damaging maneuvers, and expecting the rest of us to look the other way, maybe he's not the guy for the job. Maybe I should take his job. Is that an advisable course of action? I mean, why should this guy who cares about the betterment of the company for everybody quit? It seems like the guy who wants to cut corners probably should be the guy who quits. I mean, in other words, is this what the boss is imagining? at any point should he engage on that level?
Right? Make it a
I mean,
self-fulfilling prophecy, basically.
precisely.
Well,
I mean, would you advise that?
I think it's tough because I think that for, we discussed this in our email back and forth. He doesn't want to be the boss. He has been the
Ah,
boss before. He
right.
enjoys a lower key lifestyle, right? And I
Okay.
think that is one of the challenges is that the people that I know who have been in leadership, who have intentionally chosen to step away from leadership, they just don't want
Mhm.
the headaches, right? They
Yeah.
don't want the call at 2 o'clock in the morning. They don't want to have to do whatever
Yeah.
they want to leave their job at the office or on the golf course when they are done and not have to think about it. They don't want to deal with politics. So it sounds like this was an intentional decision on
Yeah.
Jack's part. But again, this comes down to the sort of moral and ethical framework, right? If he feels like, hey,
Yeah.
I can just, I think there's a couple things that you can do, right? One is you can make it a self-fulfilling prophecy and try to take the guy's job
Mhm.
and make some, larger changes, run a tighter ship as it were.
Yep.
Two, you could just keep your head down and wait and
Yep.
see what happens, right?
Right. Right.
Because I think there's
Right.
a big difference in someone maybe being like disrespectful or a little bit distant
Yeah.
or frustrated with you. If there's no
Mm.
safety issues that are involved, if he
Yeah.
has stopped scheduling people for 15-hour shifts, if
Right.
the paperwork's getting filed and you really
Yeah.
like your job in this sunny clime, then
Yep.
maybe just stay out of his way. Don't say anything negative about him. Don't talk trash about him. Do what you're asked that's reasonable within your job duties and just keep your head down. Right.
Mm.
And then I think the last one comes to, you know, how important is it? How many, is this an isolated incident? And in the entire time at this organization, this is the only time that this has happened? Or
Mhm.
have there been a lot of cutting corners and this just
Yeah.
happened to be the one that resulted in injury? Because I do
Yeah.
think that that's an issue, especially because he mentioned more than once there's a
Mm.
group of people. This is not an issue with just him and his boss. There's a group of
Yeah.
young people who are new in the work world, right? It's essentially the hospitality industry, right? I
Yeah.
mean, there's a lot of injuries in hospitality and there's a lot of people who, I don't know if this is a place that has any union representation, but he certainly didn't talk about
Yeah.
it. You know,
Yeah.
do you want to step in and change it so
Yeah.
that there are systems in place? Because that is another option is to so Jack went to the boss, didn't get what he needed, went to the boss's boss, who then turned around and ratted him out.
Yeah.
Is there somebody higher in the food chain? Is there an HR? Is there legal? Is there somebody where you can say, this is a liability issue? Can we look at some of the processes? Or you think no?
I think, and I had a hinky feeling the first time around that if the boss, if Jack's boss's boss went back and told Jack's boss that Jack had told him that this guy is not interested in honest reporting.
Yeah.
You don't. This is not. You can't be where you are and that bad at your job to know that you're not going to be creating problems for Jack. So you did it on purpose because what you're pushing for is the status quo. Like I worked in some fast health food restaurant when I was 16, 17. A chemist had come in and said, "Hey, those plates that you have, very specifically those plates you just served me on with tomatoes, do you know that tomatoes, the acidic acid in tomatoes combines with that type of styrofoam and it creates a poisonous? Look at my plate." And it indeed burned the section of the plate. And I go, "Oh my God, thank you for letting me know." I rushed back into the boss's office, the manager's office, say, "Hey, bro, this is," and he just looked at me. And I said, "Well, so I probably, you should know." He like, "Yeah, go back to work." He goes, "But you know, shit." He goes, "I got a storeroom for them. I got 10,000 of them. You, because some scientist walks in here, you want me to?" Yeah, I guess it's not about the public health. Our health food store is not about the public. He goes, "Go back to work." And that was my first taste of, economic drivers, I guess. Yeah, you know,
Well, and there are plenty of companies that build into their cost of doing business the
yeah,
cost of litigation for product failures that end up in injury or death.
yeah.
It's,
So
you
yeah,
know,
yeah. Yeah. So I think that this, and that's for Jack to figure out. But I think that I don't. This is not. Nobody's that stupid. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, if you've been a kid, you got to know that this is going to end up with Jack having problems, and you did it for a reason. So
Well, and I think the other thing when we're talking about somebody, let's just say Jack is as experienced and he's in that sort of like superstar category that we were talking
yeah,
about earlier.
right,
If you've got somebody that is a high performer,
yeah,
then you should realize that they could be, you know, taken away or like somebody else could come and poach them. But if
yeah,
you are a high performer, you
right,
need to truly understand your value and
right,
question
right,
why stay in a dysfunctional relationship
yep,
with potentially hazardous health issues to the people working around you,
yeah,
because if you're as good as you say you are, which I believe you are, you can get a job somewhere else that
yeah,
is aware of safety issues, that is
uh,
going to follow best practices.
yeah. Yeah. Again, how what the industry is like, how the industry is structured. Is it small enough that the word is going to get back to? I mean, I'm in Silicon Valley, but I've seen people get let's call it gentle blackballed, and I'm not saying they didn't deserve it. I'm not saying at all that they didn't deserve it. A few of them were horrible managers when I was at corporate computing. They deserved it, but at the same time, it was just kind of weird for me to experience. In fact, like I'm hearing stories about people I worked with from new people I worked with who don't know that I know that person. So this is like the whisper network of Silicon Valley. And I didn't like the person in question, but they had a bad day. It should have followed them from job to job, but this is a peril. So
Well, I think it goes both ways. I mean, the Whisper Network has certainly been used by the way that I've heard that referenced is by
yeah.
women who tell other women, you
Mm.
don't want to work with that guy.
Right.
Right. And
Right.
I have
That way.
done that. Other women have done
Yeah.
that to me. Like, be aware, don't hire this guy. Don't work with that, and that
Yeah.
person. So, but I think that what you're talking about is the flip side of that, which
Mhm.
is, like one of the things that I remember the first time that I got fired for reasons that were gendered. Um,
Mhm.
I remember very distinctly thinking, I can't bring a lawsuit for what just happened to me, even though it was completely illegal,
Yeah.
because Seattle's a small town. I was working in tech at a startup.
Yeah.
And, this is many years ago. And I thought, I'm going to get a reputation as the woman that brought a
Yeah.
lawsuit against this famous, founder.
Yeah.
And I'll never work in Seattle again,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I
Which I think was a reasonable concern.
I think it was a
Yeah.
reasonable concern, and I have now had, counting that one, which was not something that I had to litigate. I just signed a paper and they gave me a bunch of money because I threatened to sue.
Mhm.
Useful, threatened to sue, but then don't actually sue. But and that was many years ago. But I have 3 legal settlements in my favor.
Yeah.
3, and I was talking to a friend, a younger friend, about um, my this blurb when I was going to be speaking at a conference, and I was talking about ageism, and
Mhm.
that's kind of my proof point. Like, I've had 3 gendered
Yeah.
lawsuits settled in my favor.
Yeah.
And she was like, "Well, you know, I don't know that you want to say 3." And I was like, "Why?" And she was like, "Well, I mean, you don't want to sound, you know, difficult."
That's
And
funny.
you know what? She wasn't wrong. And I
Yeah.
actually, I mean, I changed it. And I think that is one of the things that I will say about the whistleblower thing is that I've never faced a health and safety issue
Mhm.
in at work, but I've certainly seen a lot of sexual harassment. I've seen a lot of,
Yeah.
you know, um, racist behavior, and I have spoken up about it. And
Mhm.
that has not helped my career.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a settlement for sexual harassment, and one of the terms, I had to agree to certain things to get the money. I was sexually harassed. I had to agree to never speak about it publicly and identify the company, which is understandable. Could not talk about the money or the settlement. Um, and there was a second thing that I can't remember, but the third thing that bugged me was never to seek employment with the company again. And I thought that that was overly punitive. And so I laid in wait for the company. And eventually they had a job that, of course, I was perfect for. And I applied. Just to, I had no burning interest in working there again. I already had a job someplace else, but I just wanted to see what would happen. And made it through two different levels of interviews and was about to get an offer. Like on Monday, we're going to put some things together. And then somehow somebody said, let's check him out. Who they discovered over the weekend that I had been the guy, I'm just a large company. We're talking thousands of employees, but that there had been this issue. And of course, I didn't get the job, but they had nothing to, what are they going to do? Try to claw back the money they had paid me 15 years earlier. But it was just interesting. I mean, and this is at the heart of Jack's thing. It's interesting, like, how long are the arms of punishment? No, because that should frame what you do and how you do it. And if the arms are going to be long and go over 15 years, maybe like like somebody was saying about Tom Brady, fuck them kids. That's the issue.
Well, or you make a decision. Like I did a one-woman show called Disclosure, and I talked about non-disclosure agreements. And two of these settlements had non-disclosure agreements. And I never have talked about how much money I got, right?
Yep.
Because that, again, seems fair. But I have certainly talked about the fact that I have gotten settlements, and I have talked about what happened to me. And my thought, particularly with one of them, was, come on.
Yep.
Doing a hand gesture.
Try it again.
Like, come on, go ahead and sue me. Go ahead and sue me, because I will talk publicly about all the stuff you did. And they have never, I did the one woman show a few years ago. They have never, that was 2019. They have never said peep to me. And certainly the non-disclosure components of, those kind of settlements have come under fire. But I think, again, it's, be careful if you're going to be a whistleblower, and be ready. But again, to those of you that are brave enough to do it, to speak up, to take action, good for you.
Yep. Yeah. What is that great line, that Dylan line? To live outside the law, which he probably stole from somebody else. To live outside the law, you must be honest. So as long as that's the case, I think you've got nothing to fear.
Yeah. All right. That's what we've got time for. Again, WTF at badbossbrief.com. We'd love to hear your ideas or questions, and we'll see you in a couple weeks. Thanks. Bye.
Adios. See you later.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Bad Boss Brief podcast with your hosts, Eugene S. Robinson and Stephanie Peirolo. You can check out more of their work by visiting consigliera.substack.com for Stephanie and eugenesrobinson.substack.com for Eugene. You can also find Eugene at Mr. Sleep 3, that's number 3, on Instagram. Reach out with your questions, concerns, work case situations, or suggestions to us at WTF@badbossbrief.com. We personally answer every submission. Be sure to join us at badbossbrief.substack.com every other Wednesday for episodes of Bad Boss Brief, so you can gain further insights into your workplace environments. Until next time, don't be an asshole at work.